Hi guys. Um, my name is Denise LeCamp. Please do call me Denise when you're writing emails and stuff. Okay. Anyway, so this is the first lecture video, and it's on chapter 2 on utilitarianism. Make sure that you read the introduction by the editor, Kaufman, as well as the actual piece provided by John Stuart Mill, which is an excerpt from his book, funnily enough, called Utilitarianism. Okay? So if you look on modules, you'll see that there's a section for lecture videos and lecture notes. So I put up the notes that I'm going through. So read them as you watch the lecture, have the notes up, and read them at the same time. And you should have your book, hopefully, if you have the book, and you probably want to get that, because you definitely need to use quotes and things for papers and discussions, okay? So let's go. Chapter 2 starts on page 9. But before we get to exactly what Kaufman says, you'll see on the lecture notes that I've written something about consequentialism. Utilitarianism is a branch of what's called consequentialist ethics. There are many ethical theories, that is, theories of how to figure out what is morally right and morally wrong, because that's something of a difficult question, right? Kaufman explains in chapter 1 that thinkers are not interested in what other people have told us is morally right and morally wrong. Parents, the church, our culture, because those are human beings, and they can get it wrong. And sometimes institutions and other things have certain motives that give them a particular reason to say that this behavior is right or wrong, and it's not because the behavior is actually something that they think is right or wrong. They have another motive for telling us that. So any good, critically thinking, rational human being will look into his moral beliefs for himself and see if what we've been told really holds any water. And if it doesn't, we may need to shed those beliefs. So, utilitarianism is one way of thinking about what makes sense as right and wrong, morally speaking. If my dogs might bark or something or be ridiculous, and then I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so consequentialism is a main branch of ethical theory, and we'll look at a number of ethical theories in this class. And utilitarianism is one subset of consequentialism. So you see I've got the definition of consequentialism. The moral value of an action is determined by its consequences or its outcomes. So then I have some 3 little points underneath, and the last one, nothing is intrinsically good or bad about actions themselves. No action is intrinsically, innately, in and of itself, good or bad, morally speaking, right or wrong. It's only good or bad if it has consequences that are good or bad. The consequences of actions are what make them right or wrong to do. All actions are, as it were, neutral or amoral. Make sure you understand this. There's moral, immoral, and amoral. Amoral and immoral are not even close to being the same thing, so don't confuse them. moral and immoral both suggest that you have some kind of moral standards, or there's some kind of moral aspect to an action or a belief. It's either a right or wrong one. Amoral means that this action or this belief or something lacks moral value entirely. So an amoral belief might be that my hair is getting kind of long or something, so I need to get it trimmed. There's no moral aspect to that belief. It's not right or wrong, good or bad to think that. I'm not sinning or something, and that's crazy. So that's an amoral belief. It's completely neutral. Consequentialism understands all beliefs, all actions to be amoral in and of themselves. They become moral or immoral when we look at the consequences of those actions. This has, the consequentialism is important in that it's very intuitive, because it looks like in certain situations it is wrong, morally speaking, to push someone you love away and not listen to them, not listen to their point of view, and want to be rid of them. Sometimes that is, that's wrong. It lacks compassion, that action. But sometimes it's right. If you have a drug addict in your family, these people will enable them by saying, you know, they're the parents or something, they let them stay in the basement. Some of these people will even give them money to get their drugs, because they say, well, it's safer, then she doesn't have to go out on the streets and get it, where she could be raped or killed. Yeah, okay, fine. Except that every single time, the most compassionate thing to do is to let the person hit rock bottom, because if you enable them, they will remain a drug addict. And that doesn't help. You're actually harming them by not pushing them away, by not saying, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm done with this behavior. Until you get help for yourself, we are no longer on speaking terms. I will not aid you in this behavior anymore. That is the most compassionate thing to do, although at first blush, it may not seem like it. So it looks, and that's because the consequences of doing that they tend to be good. When people, it looks pretty good that when drug addicts or any other kind of addict or something needs rehabilitation, and you put them in a place where they're forced to get it, they get better. They get the rehabilitation. They actually have an opportunity to get better. This is a positive consequence. And that means that your action, although it seemed harsh, you know, it's tough love. It's in and of itself, it's just an action. Because it has good consequences, it was a good action. Right? So there's a lot of intuition on the side of consequentialism, and I think that one thing we'll see in this course, we'll look at a number of different ethical theories, some of which are diametrically opposed. They will say that exactly different things are right or wrong. I think one thing that we'll come to discover is that there's no real way to know before you have the particulars of a situation what is right or wrong to do, the right or wrong response. We can say, well, anytime something happens, murder or killing someone is always wrong. Well, you don't seem to think that when someone is breaking into your house, holding the gun to your children's head or something. We seem to justify killing in wartime. There are all different kinds of things. The state justifies murder through capital punishment, through the death penalty in this country. Not every country has the death penalty. By the way, we'll be reading about that in a later chapter. It's not so black and white, what is right and wrong. Particular circumstances will call for particular responses, but those responses have to make sense within the context of the circumstance, and every circumstance is different. There are always details that make it unique, and even something that looks very similar may indeed call for a different response from you. So, utilitarianism, just like all the other ethical theories we'll look at, will make sense often, but probably not all the time. Okay? So, let's look back at the notes. As I say, so I restated this idea. An action is morally good if and only if it produces a good outcome. And then it's morally bad if and only if it produces a good outcome. But actions are neither good nor bad, good nor evil in themselves. Okay? So it's all based on the outcome. So this is opposed to, that's better, a moral, or an ethical theory that we will not read in chapter 3 because it's, if you look at it, you'll thank me for not making you read it. It's very difficult. So utilitarianism, consequentialism, is opposed to the idea that I write in the second bullet point here. A moral action, a morally good action, is defined by the action itself. So regardless of the outcomes, if your intention is good, if your action is good, then no matter what the outcomes may be, you still did the right thing. This also has intuition on its side, because we think that if you accidentally do the right thing, let me think of an example. I can't think of an example right now. If I trip and fall and it accidentally pushes the old lady out of the way of the car that's barreling down on her, but I didn't mean to. I was actually trying to run away and shove her in front of the car or something, but I accidentally got her out of the way and saved her life. We don't seem to think that I'm a good person, that action was morally good just because it accidentally happened to have these excellent consequences. We still seem to think that I'm not a good person, right? So, and you'll see that I put here Anne Frank example, that EX means example. The standard example provided here is that, the Nazis are coming to the house where Anne Frank and her family are hiding. And the guy, I don't remember the guy's name in history who was the one hiding them. I think it was a man and a woman. I don't remember their names, but they come to the door, and the Nazis say, "Is Anne Frank upstairs? Is she hiding out? Do you have any Jews hiding in your attic?" Okay, so according to this other theory that we're not going to read, lying is always wrong. Telling the truth is always right. So the right thing to do in this situation is say, yes, I am hiding Jews upstairs. Now, the Nazis will go up and get Anne Frank and her family, and they go to concentration camps, and they all die except for her father. And we think, well, if you had just lied, that wouldn't have happened. But this theory says, look, I'm not the one who killed Anne Frank. I'm not the Nazi who put her in the concentration camp. It's not really my fault. I did the right thing. I told the truth. If somebody else, the Nazis, chose to do something evil, that's not my fault. It wasn't my choice. I did the right thing. There's intuition on that side too. The problem with it is that it does appear that there are moral priorities, and some of them trump other ones. So I have a moral imperative, a duty, a responsibility to protect another human life. And that is more important, that moral imperative is far more important than my duty to tell the truth all the time. So if I have to sacrifice a lower level moral imperative for a higher level one, then that seems like it's right to do in that situation. Again, tough to know what the right thing is prior to being in the particular situation, prior to having all of the details of the context. But that doesn't mean that studying this stuff is pointless for us, as if, well, I can't know anything until I'm in the moment anyway, so why bother looking at this? Because it can certainly give us a handle on, when I'm in the moment, what my duties and responsibilities are, how to discover what they are, what my options are for behavior. Okay? So it is important to look at this stuff all the same. Now, so let's go then to page 9. So look at the top, the very beginning, the first paragraph. So he says, Kaufman starts out, when we deliberate about what we ought to do, the consequences of our actions are a natural starting place for moral assessment. But not just any consequences. Now here's the kicker. If we first have an account of what is ultimately good or worthwhile, then we can measure the consequences of our actions with respect to those ends. Here's the idea. If I have a goal, and I know exactly what the goal is, then isn't it a lot easier to figure out the best route to take to reach that goal? If I don't know where I'm aiming, what I'm aiming at, how do I know where to hold the arrow? If you already have a goal, then you can assess the different paths that one could take to reach that goal. So, for instance, an obvious thing here, if I have the goal of doing well in school, I can take a few different paths. I can study hard, I can go to class every day, I can ask questions, I can take notes. That's one path to take. I could not do much reading, not use the writing center to help me with papers, miss classes, not pay attention, text on my cell phone during classes. Okay, I think we can assess pretty easily which of those routes is going to more efficiently allow me to reach my goal of doing well in school, right? But I have to have the goal first before I can assess the routes that I'm taking to get there. So, if I have a goal in ethics, then I can assess the routes to take to get to that goal. Now, the goal that he is pointing out, for ethics, you see that I have these 4 statements listed. The first one, ethics is concerned with doing what's right or good, not with what's wrong or bad. My goal in ethics, my goal in school is to do well, to get good grades and to learn and stuff. Okay, was when I was a student. My goal in ethics is to do what's morally right. There's my goal. I want to be an ethical person. Some people, by the way, don't have that goal in ethics. That's not just a goal that we're given. Some people don't care about doing what's right. Some people, that's not a priority for them. And those people are terrible and frightening, and they lack humanity. And it's very scary. But most of us, I should hope, do care about doing what's right. And we want to be good people. And that's a goal, not just in our ethical lives, but in our lives as human beings, in our entire lives. We want to be virtuous, good people who do good things for ourselves and others. By the way, keep in mind that we certainly have an ethical responsibility to ourselves, just as well as to other people, and other sentient and non-sentient beings on the planet, like the environment and animals, all of which we should take care of, because we have to live with them, and without them, we cannot live. So it's very important to be respectful of other things on the planet. And we'll talk about that later too. So I have my goal. I want to do what's good and right. So there are many different things that I can do to get there, and some of them are better and worse. Okay, one thing, by the way, is thinking critically about what's good and right. That will be helpful in actually doing what's good and right. Okay? Now look at the second thing that I say. If we know which things are good, then we can aim for them in any situation. So ethics is concerned with doing what's good. What is good? What is this? Is there some ultimate good, some best thing that I care about attaining in every situation? Blah, 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 blah. It looks like happiness is this one best thing. It looks this way because you see at the bottom of page 9, and then to the next page he starts talking about this. Whenever I look at why I do anything, I say, well, I want to, go to school to get the job. I hope that's not why you want to go to school. You should want to go to school for the acquisition of knowledge, as well as, getting a good job that is fulfilling for you and allows you to provide for yourself. But knowledge is intrinsically valuable for its own sake. By the way, if you go into something like school not caring about knowledge and only understanding it as a means to an end of ultimately money, you're not gonna do as well as somebody who actually cares about the acquisition of knowledge itself. Anyway, we'll talk about that stuff later too. But, so you want to go to school to get the job, to get the money, to make sure you have a house, to provide for a family. But why do you want a family? Why do you want a house? Why do you want all that stuff? Ultimately, it gets back to because I believe, correctly or incorrectly, that those things will allow me to be happy. Okay? And I'm not going to go into the idea about whether or not those things actually lead to happiness. We'll certainly talk about that later, too. But let's just assume that they do. Certainly we think that they do. That family and stuff leads to happiness. So ultimately, when I look at anything that I do, I can draw this sort of causal chain. Why do I want this? Because of this. Because it gets me this. Why do I want this? Because it gets me this. Why do I want this? Because it gets me happiness. It looks like happiness is the final end goal of all our desires and actions, because it does not look like we want happiness in order to get something better than happiness. Everything that we want or strive for, we either want as a means to an end, or as an end in itself, or a combo of both of those things. So when I was a student, my main priority, I wanted it as an end in itself. I'm very interested in the acquisition of knowledge. But I also wanted to, get a good job and things, and I have one of the most amazing jobs in the world. I mean, I get to talk about this all day, and that's pretty amazing. So I wanted schooling as an end in itself and as a means to an end. And there are many things that we want as only a means to an end. Something like money. When we think about it, money is just paper. In and of itself, it doesn't have value. I don't want the paper. It's not like I collect. If I'm interested in like numismatics which is coin collecting, then I'm not collecting it as money to spend. I'm collecting it for the aesthetic, for the history, whatever. But in terms of just the way we usually want to get money, we're not all coin collectors. We usually want money because we want to use it to get us stuff that we really want. It's not like I just want hordes of money just for the sake of that. I want the money to be spent on things that I really do value. The money is just paper. In and of itself, it doesn't have any value. Money is only valuable as a means to an end. So there are many things like that that I want. It looks like that there's only, and there are thousands of years philosophers have been discussing this point, but it looks like many of them, and certainly Mill, understand that the only thing that is an end, only an end in itself, and not also a means to an end, like schooling, right? It's an end in itself and a means to an end. Money is only a means to an end. Well, there's one thing that's only an end in itself, and that is happiness. It doesn't look like by getting happiness, I get something else that's even better than happiness. Like I want happiness to get something that is superior to happiness. It looks like I want everything because in the end it will lead to happiness, and that happiness is really my end goal entirely in life. Anyway, so the utilitarians take that as a fundamental premise of what they're doing. Now, so number 4 then, so we've discovered what my goal is. It is to achieve happiness. So now I can assess the routes that I take in life toward that goal. Here's a route that will probably not lead to happiness, but a lot of people do. Eating McDonald's and stuff every day, and pizza and so on. As delicious as it may be, it's not going to make me healthy. And when your body isn't healthy, that does affect your mood, first of all. You know, there are chemicals that are released in the brain and things when you're unhealthy. And, you know, especially as a woman, gaining weight in this culture is not looked upon favorably. As nice as it is for the moment, perhaps, ultimately it's not going to be the best route to take to lead to happiness. The better route is to have things in moderation, but ultimately to care about my health, mentally and physically. So that's one idea about how to reach happiness. In terms of ethics, in any given situation, my goal should be, if happiness is this greatest good thing, and ethics is about doing what is good, happiness is ultimately what is good, then in any ethical situation, I need to choose the route that will lead to the most amount of happiness for the most people. Now, if you go down, so I said, why does happiness appear to be the only intrinsic good? We already talked about that, because all my actions seem to lead to it, ultimately. Go to the next thing, the benevolent spectator. This is an important point in utilitarianism. Well, here, I'll read it. All happiness is equal. That is, one person's happiness isn't, as it were, worth more than another person's happiness. In a given situation, I must maximize the happiness for the greatest number, even if that means sacrificing my own. All happiness is worth the same. My happiness is not more important. It's not worth more than somebody else's. So, in a given situation, if it's required of me that maximizing the happiness for others means sacrificing something for myself, then that is the right thing to do. Because ethics is about doing what's right and good. And the thing that is good, the very best good, the most important good, is happiness. So ethics is about doing whatever will create the most good, the most happiness. If that means that there's a trade-off and 20 people can be saved because I am sacrificed, that's the right thing to do. Now, let's see where I put this. You'll notice here, if you look on pages 10 and 11, he notes some potential, Kaufman notes some potential flaws with the utilitarian principle, one of which is that it might require, to do the utilitarian ethical thing, may require that I do something brutal to a smaller group so that the majority can live or whatever. If you know about this, Mao Zedong, who was a tyrannical ruler of China for a long time, he was not a good man. He very infamously said, after I think the count was like 30 million Chinese people died and from starvation, and he said, better that half of the people starve so that the rest can eat their fill. This sounds utilitarian at first glance, and a lot of people will use that kind of thinking as an argument against utilitarianism, because it looks like utilitarianism denies what we think is fundamentally good: compassion for all. This isn't quite right, and we'll see why. If you look actually at the very last thing that I say on the lecture notes, and it's on, oh, I didn't write the page in here, I'll do that. He says this on page 15, Mill says this in his text on page 15, the right-hand column, the first full paragraph that starts, I have dwelt on this point as being a necessary part, okay? If you go, this is no good, sorry. If you go to the middle of that paragraph, I'm just going to start reading. I don't have a way to tell you where it is. For that standard is not the agent's own greatest happiness. This is the idea of the benevolent spectator. But the greatest amount of happiness altogether. That's the standard I'm aiming for. The greatest amount of happiness altogether, not just mine. And if it may possibly be doubted whether a noble character is always the happier for its nobleness, there could be no doubt that it makes other people happier, and that the world in general is immensely a gainer by it. Utilitarianism, therefore, could only attain its end by the general cultivation of nobleness of character. So, for Mill, this idea that it's better to just let 30 million Chinese people starve so that the other millions and millions of Chinese people can live, it doesn't work. Nobleness, doing what is noble each time, is the thing that will create the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number. It seems like, well, if we have 90 million Chinese, we let 30 million die so that 60 million can live. Isn't that just an obvious, like, numbers? 60 million is greater than 30 million. So the amount of happiness is maximized then, right? No, it doesn't work like that. Being a part of a system that, a government, a country, that allows that kind of thing to happen, that says that that is okay, that that is necessary, that exudes that kind of attitude about its citizens. Whether I get to live, I get to be one of the 60 million who live, doesn't seem to matter, because I live in a place that harbors this kind of attitude about me. I could have easily been one of the 30 million. It harbors this kind of attitude about human life. Ultimately, knowing that these people died so that I could live under a rule like this is not going to really truly allow for me to be happy. It's difficult to be happy when you know that other people have suffered dearly for your happiness. Mill doesn't see that we can just go murdering and sacrificing people or children all over the place, and that that's a-okay because it just allows more people to survive. Survival isn't just the end goal here. Just because I'm alive does not mean I'm happy. There's a difference between survival and living. Happiness comes not just from being alive, but from living well. Right? So, keep this in mind. Don't let yourself be taken in by that kind of idea. Mill is not interested in these kinds of cruelties, okay? Ultimately, as he sees it, cruelty, although it may initially appear to allow for more happiness, in the end it doesn't. It will always come back and bite us in the butt. It will always end up making things worse. Nobleness of character, every time, will be the thing that allows for the greatest happiness. So, in a situation like that, it's not better that half of the people die so the other half can eat their fill. It's better that everyone work together to help each other so that everyone can eat and develop a sense of real harmony and community and compassion for one another. That promotes deep human happiness. Not this sort of warring nature, it's us or them. That doesn't promote happiness, that promotes fear. That doesn't promote dignity, human integrity, humanity. That promotes hatred. So, keep that kind of thinking in mind. Now, so let's go to Mill's actual text here, which begins on page 13. Okay, first of all, we know what the ultimate good is. Happiness. Well, this sort of begs the question, though. And I started to define happiness a little bit, but what is the ultimate? What is happiness? Actually, this is going to be a really long video, so I'm going to stop here and make part 2.